What do you imagine is going through Keir Starmer's head when he is confronted with what is quite clearly a blasphemy law about the desecration of the Quran, and he then says, "Yes, I quite agree." Cause this is a learned man, I imagine, Keir Starmer. He must know that. Hang on, this is a bit of a slippery slope. So what's going through his mind?
I don't think Keir Starmer really does think that much at all, in the sense that I think Starmer is a classic progressive. I think he's a radical progressive. We know where Starmer is on a lot of issues. You know, we know about his past and the cases that he presided over. We know where he was on Brexit. He wanted a second referendum. He wanted people to essentially be forced to remain in the European Union. I would be amazed if Keir Starmer did not know about the revelation that Axel Rudakabana, the alleged murderer of those little girls, had downloaded Islamist literature and had produced ricin or been on his way to producing ricin. I would be amazed if Keir Starmer had not known that while he was deriding much of the country as far-right thugs. I've been told by counter-terrorism officials and former ministers, I'll leave it there, that both Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper would have been told almost immediately after that knowledge, after that information became known. And the reason I'm saying that is I think the most revealing part of Keir Starmer's political story and who he is as a politician was in the aftermath of Southport. I think what you saw there, that very authoritarian top-down response, you know, everyone here is a far-right thug. I'm viewing this issue through the lens of criminality. There are no legitimate concerns here about migration. Essentially, that's what he said. And then months later, when he set out his priorities for his Labour government, even then he didn't prioritise migration, even though it's the number one issue in the country. And I think all of this adds up to a guy that just doesn't understand, doesn't get how normal people think and feel. Radical progressives will always reach for free speech clampdowns, for free expression clampdowns, because they cannot tolerate challenges and opinions and beliefs that are counter to those that they hold. So we know Labour were trying to work with Kamala Harris and the Democrats to quote unquote kill Elon Musk's Twitter. We know that Keir Starmer would be probably quite receptive to expanding definitions of Islamophobia in order to shut down legitimate criticism of Islam. We know that Yvette Cooper, his Home Secretary, wants to make it easier to record non-crime hate incidents, the Orwellian measures that are used to basically try and control speech and expression. All of this stuff is now mainstream on the left of politics because it is about narrowing down and controlling the public square and not allowing people to express any opposition to that. And I think Islamophobia is the next big debate within that. I think the term will be expanded. I suspect new laws will be introduced. For Labour, it makes sense because British Muslims are a massive part of their electoral coalition. They need to constantly prioritise identity politics. But the big loser in all of that will be our national community. Instead of appealing to tribal identity groups, we need leaders who rise above that and say, actually, we have a national system and a national story here, and we're not going to pander to identity grievances.
Does it wind you up thinking about, if we got to that point, let's say that Iran got to, and Lebanon, I believe, where the left teamed up with Islamism and Islamism took over, I get wound up thinking, you know, I wouldn't be able to go up to Keir Starmer and say, look, mate, look what you've done, you know, because it never works out. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's a childish thing inside me. I want to say, like, I want to shake them and go, like, what? Look what you're doing. Look what you've done. But they seem to be living in the cloud.
Well, there was a study recently that showed that people on the radical progressive left are just as authoritarian as people on the right can be. Sure. And what happens when they're confronted with evidence that challenges their beliefs, they tend to ignore it. And I think you see that with the Labour Party. I mean, if you try and make the argument that what they are creating through mass immigration, by failing to control the borders, by pandering to, let's say, radical, if not extreme groups, they're creating a very divided, low trust society. That's exactly what New Labour did, by the way. Much of this goes back to New Labour and the legal architecture that they put in to Britain's political system. A lot of this, I think, goes back to the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, the Supreme Court, New Labour's kind of insistence that supranational institutions like the European Union and others should always dominate and be supreme over our national law and over ourselves as a sovereign, self-guiding nation. And if you look at the legacy of things like the Human Rights Act or the European Convention on Human Rights, which has a longer lineage, that's why we can't control our borders. So we're now getting at the point where neither Labour nor the Conservatives will commit to overturning any of that stuff. And so by extension, they won't commit to controlling our own borders. I mean, the only people who will, and Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. So that is the clearest dividing line that we now have in British politics between what you might call the uniparty that is indistinguishable on a lot of these issues and Farage and Reform.